Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Free Thinking with Montel. And today I'm so excited to have my guest because he's the author of a best-selling book, Who's in the Waiting Room? Create the Life You Want Through the Power of Authentic Relationships. He dropped out of high school at age 16, and it was the last in a long line of defeats for an underprivileged young man. Self-raised in a tumultuous home with an abusive father and a mother who was significantly disabled with multiple sclerosis. Today, he's a partner at the law firm of Goldstein and Bashner and is sharing a story of overcoming incredible obstacles and hopes of inspiring others. Neal Goldstein, thank you so much for being a part of Free Thinking with Montel today, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate the invitation and being here.
Absolutely. And the book has been out and is now available where?
On Amazon.
On Amazon. So people can go out and get a copy of it. And again, the title's Who's in the Waiting Room? Create the Life You Want Through the Power of Authentic Relationships. But before we talk about the book itself, let's talk a little bit more about you and your backstory, which you cover very intensely in your book. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me about your childhood.
I grew up in Queens, New York, specifically Rockaway Beach. I grew up, my mom was a victim of multiple sclerosis in the days when there were very limited resources and very few treatment options. I had two brothers, and I had a father that was an abusive man and that ultimately absconded the household when I was about 11 or 12.
And abusive, was he physically abusive or he was just really, I mean, for the way you kind of portray him in the book, especially in the first chapter, he was really kind of emotionally detached and emotionally abusive and extremely emotionally abusive to your mother, almost blaming her for her situation.
Well, you said it perfectly, and that's true. That's exactly what he was. He was emotionally and verbally abusive.
And, and how old were you when your mother was diagnosed?
Well, my mother was diagnosed when she was 18 back in the late 40s.
Okay, gotcha.
Went into a 20-year remission. And after my two brothers were born, the doctors told her not to have another child. The one time that she got daring was, I guess, worked out for me, but not for her, because after my birth, that's when things started to go downhill.
Yeah, it's very odd because there are instances, and we've seen it very clearly in the data and literature. Sometimes back in that day, they used to actually suggest women have babies because MS symptoms would kind of abate while they were carrying. But then in other cases, MS symptoms got much more virulent when a woman was carrying a baby. So it was really kind of a toss up, and doctors didn't know what they were doing in the 40s and 50s, especially with this disease. It was really kind of unknown. Most of the time, it's thought to be a psychological disorder in a woman's head. And back then, the predominance of people diagnosed with MS were all women. We didn't start seeing men get diagnosed with MS until, the mid 60s, early 70s. So, yeah, very interesting that they would have said not to have a child because I know of other women back then that they were saying, have a baby because your symptoms will go away. And, it's part of what there's still research being done on it right now. It's something called alpha fetoprotein, which is a protein that exists in the mother and the baby to keep them from looking at themselves as parasites. So that kind of suppresses the immune system. And that's the reason why they think that babies could help. But, the jury is way out on that. It had profound effect on your family, did it not? Your mother's diagnosis, I mean.
It did. Yeah, you have to remember what I remember as a really young boy, her walking with a limp. Then I saw it progress, where she was walking with a walker. And then at some point, she went into a wheelchair, probably when I was 11 or 12. That was the moment that my father walked out. And because my brothers were significantly older than me, at least 7 or 8 years older than me at the time, I, believe it or not, the caretaking for some period of time, a lot of it was left to me. And
Not
so
only the caretaking of your mother, but the caretaking of yourself, right? 11, 12 years old?
that's the key point here. And it was look, you read the book. It was extremely challenging, and it was difficult.
And I know there's a period of time that your grandmother moved in with you, or that moved closer and closer to make sure she gave your mother assistance that she needed. Your mother is your maternal grandmother, whereas your paternal grandparents kind of just blew you guys off, right? And
Well,
then your father's side of things.
as unbelievable as it is, when my father walked out, so did the rest of his family, and probably over the I never saw my grandmother or grandfather from that side of the family again, and I saw my father maybe 3 or 4 times over the next 40 or 45 years.
Right, and let's talk a little bit about this whole thing with your father. That didn't make a tough situation worse, and you just said when he abandoned your family. But let's talk a little bit about what you had to live through. I guess that would have been from about age 7 to 11, and how he responded to not only your mother but to you.
Uh, it was very difficult because, as I talked about in the book, nobody really communicated with me. At that age, you don't really know what's going on. Yeah, you could see your mom having difficulties with walking, and at times I would hear her drop something, and then I'd hear her crying, and I'd go into the room and I'd say, "What's wrong?" And she would say, "Oh, nothing. Just dropped the glass." Well, we know what that really was about. And that progressed even further as she got worse. And when she was with a walker and she walked very slow and I was with her, she would often fall. Now, many of these incidents, uh, you know, resulted in me becoming resentful. I was embarrassed. It was difficult. When I was walking with her and then she would fall, she would have to crawl to a fence to try to pick herself up because I couldn't do it at that age. And so it was very difficult for me. I became angry. I was resentful. As I said, it was embarrassing. Every time the walker came out, it was almost like a neon light to everybody that, oh, here's the kid with his sick mother. And it was,
And internally, you internalize that to kind of, and your book is about, create your life you want through authentic relationships, but you found yourself kind of isolating from relationships. You didn't have a lot of friends in school, though you had some friends. Let's use that term loosely, but
right.
you had some friends, but you really didn't have a social life in your school, correct?
That's correct. I mean, look, for better or for worse, Montel, our parents are the first people that we have relationships with, and where you don't have access to either of them for one reason or another, life becomes very difficult. And my brothers, as I said, were away doing their own thing, and friends. What are you going to tell your 11-year-old friend? You don't even know.
Your older brother was off to school, and your other brother
Right.
was spending time at friends' houses, right?
Right, right. So what do you think an 11-year-old is going to share with another 11-year-old? Not much.
Right.
So you hold it in, you become angry and you become resentful and all those things, you act out on at times.
You talked about a very interesting story in your book about the time that your dad suggested, I think you were going to go eat Chinese food or something, and your mother had to use a walker to, and you were living on what, the 18th floor or something like that, and
We
your
were
mother had
living
to,
on the top floor, yeah.
top floor, and your mother had to use a walker to to get to the elevator and to get the elevator down to the ground, which is the garage, and then come out of the garage and walk to the car. But she was moving so slowly. Explain the story. She was moving so slowly that your father ended up just
Yeah.
leaving her in the garage, right? Talk about that.
He had no patience, and I'm sure he had tremendous anger and resentment himself for one reason or another, and at
The
that moment,
resentment of his wife for being sick.
that's correct.
Got it. Go ahead.
And at some point in the story that you're describing, he just couldn't handle it anymore, and he said to me, "Come on, let's just go. Let's just go." And I looked at my mother, and my mother said, "Go ahead, go," because I think she wanted me to get out. And so I went with my father, and of course, that at the moment I didn't realize how
Cool he
impactful
was.
that was going to be for the rest of my life. And
Right.
it was one of those moments when you look back in your life, one of several for me, that you say this was is going to be embedded in my brain.
Right. And this was embedded enough that you weren't acting out in school, but you were not necessarily acting in school, participating the way you should have been, right? There was a
Uh,
period of time where they took you out of regular classes and put you kind of in shop classes kind of thing?
yeah, yeah, I was in there with, a bunch of people that I didn't feel comfortable with. I mean, these were we were all kids that for one reason or another didn't want to go to school, and I guess in an effort to keep us in school, they would give you 5 hours of fixing cars and an hour or two of English, and that didn't work out for me either.
And so you just decided after the journey got too tough to bear to go ahead and drop out.
That's right. I went to my mother with a bunch of papers at age 16. If as long as you have a parent's signature, you were able to drop out. I showed her the paperwork, and I said, "Can you sign that?" And with a look of despair and with her hand on her forehead, going through whatever hell she was going through, I guess she had hoped for the best and didn't have, I guess, the strength to fight with me, and she signed the papers.
Wow. And when did you like, what age were you when you started to recognize first off that you needed to do more than just drop out, but you started to realize that, wait a minute, I'm the sum of the plight of things that have happened so far, but my journey doesn't have to be this way.
If when I think about it, I don't know if there's one specific moment. There was a number of events that occurred after I dropped out of high school that started to make me think differently, a different mindset, if you will. So, as an example, soon after I dropped out, when I was just walking around the neighborhood, I walked into an old community center that I had gone to kindergarten, and for some reason I had nothing else to do, so I walked in there, and this team director tapped me on the shoulder, and I thought he was going to tell me to get out because I really had no legitimate reason for being there. And he says, "What are you doing here? Why aren't you going to school?" And I didn't know what to say. I was legitimately out of school. I mean, I dropped out. Uh, and I said, "Well, school's not my thing." And he turned and he looked at me with a smile, and he says, "That's okay." And he just started talking to me, no judgments, no lectures, and we became really good friends. And he was the first adult person that was actually listening to me and somebody that I could talk to and somebody that really guided me. And from that point forward, things started to change.
That's when you started to begin to realize that relationships are important in your life and impact your life, right?
For me, they're the most important things.
Mhm. And starting with that relationship, though, that was one that literally the light bulb went off, right?
The light bulb went off, and I said, that I need to do this. I need people in my life,
Mhm.
and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, now, the structure of your book is really interesting. You tell stories about what happened in your life, but then at the end of each chapter, you put in actionable success moves. Why did you do it this way?
It's tough because it's a memoir and there are lessons learned from it. Fortunately, it went somewhat chronologically, but at times it didn't feel that way. But I wanted people to understand by way of my stories that you first have to assess yourself and find out where you come from, how you built your relationships in your life at the time that you're reading the book to get an idea of how you relate to other people. Because all of us, as I said, start out our life with a mom and a dad generally, and that's where our relationships begin. And so it's good to take an inventory of yourself and see, hey, how do I relate to other people? What has gone on in my life that's going to help me relate to people better than I am now? Because we could always do better.
And I mean that's something that a lot of people don't take the time to ever do, and that's really do a retrospective look back on their history of themselves. You just said the first relationship that you have when you're born. Well, really the very first one you have is with yourself. Unfortunately, we don't spend much time checking in with ourselves. Most people that they think, well, if I talk to myself, I'm crazy. But the only person on the earth that you should really be talking to the most is yourself. There's no reason why you can't ask yourself questions. Why did I do that? There's no reason why you can't ask yourself, what was that all about? When you look back, and take a hard look at your life. And so I'm sure that that's where you begin when it comes to trying to nurture relationships. I mean, your questions are functionally that way. They take a look back and the most important relationships that you had. Well, if a person does it the correct way, they will take a look back and not only think about, oh, I remember Aunt Sally or Uncle Billy, but they'll remember moments with Aunt Sally and Uncle Billy. They'll remember things that took place that they made decisions about. There's nothing wrong with going back and evaluating the decisions that you made, right?
100%. I mean, I do that almost every day of my life, and I think it's guided me and helped me become a better version of myself constantly.
Well, what are some of the tips that you have for nurturing personal relationships?
Well, I talk about in the book several of them, and they first, I think, first and foremost, you have to acknowledge the need for other people in your life. I've met somebody recently who said to me, "I read your book, and it's a nice book, but I don't I don't have those type of relationships, and I did pretty well by myself." And so my answer to that is, uh, you know, if you take a moment and you think about the best moments in your life, the best moments in your life, if you take a moment and think about it, there are some things that you and I are going to have in common and some things that'll be different, but I can guarantee you one thing will be the same. It's a guarantee. And that is your best moments and my best moments are with other people, other human beings. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to acknowledge the need for each other. And then we could move forward and talk about, well, how do we create genuine and authentic relationships, not looking to be Machiavellian here and being to be cunning or underhanded in any way. Real, genuine, authentic relationships begin with having having things in common with other people, listening to people versus hearing. Right? I talk about that in my book. Very
But,
important.
like we're living in a time right now, Neil, where we're coming out of a pandemic and coming to grips with. I read something just a couple days ago. It was I found very interesting. Is that um, Gen Zers, Gen Xers, no, sorry, Gen Zers
Gen Z.
have been putting the smartphone aside and now running out. There's a run on flip phones at phone depots. And why? Because, there are a lot of kids out there, not a lot of kids, a lot of young people out there are realizing that, even when they go out at night, they spend more time looking and searching for bull crap than they do being present at the places that they are. And so if they take their flip phone out at night, it doesn't come with all the baggage of a smartphone like an iPhone. And
Mhm.
so we're living in a tech time right now where, you know, almost all of our relationships and or a lot of the relationships that are formed through tech are just surface bullcrap relationships. People know that, and seem to be satisfied with that. I think that's part of the reason why the world is so divided, because we've not had to stop for a second and share space with our fellow man. Um,
You know, I'm sorry. I've said all along, digital is a great way to introduce relationships, but it is no way to deepen them. And I've gone through this both with my kids, my son and my daughter, and other people that there's no way that you're going to create these types of relationships that I talk about that I think you need. There's no way to create them through digital means.
and
You know,
even though you like you just said, there's a good way to meet. I'm not necessarily sure that's really the best way to meet, because you are meeting a non-real person, an entity that's put themselves together the way they want people to perceive them rather than the way they really are.
right.
I think that has a big deal to do with the division in our societies at all around the world right now. Is
Mhm.
that we have now literally just uh, spiraled ourselves down to relationships that are just cursory and fake and created by people. I mean, you look at a lot of the internet interaction. It's all been buffered in some way, shape, or form, down to the picture. I mean, people can't take a straight up picture of themselves. They have to take a picture of themselves with 9 million filters on it. So whoever they present themselves to, they're not presenting their real self. And it's the same way right now. We've got now AI that can create, essays and write letters and write things for people. So people aren't even writing their own thoughts. They're
Let,
letting the computer do it for them.
let me give you an example. In my legal business, I am criticized by my brethren when I tell them that I go out to my clients' homes to meet them. I go out to their homes to meet them. When they tell me, well, that's not that's not a proper way to utilize your time to go out and meet your clients. You got to have somebody else do it 100. Okay, I understand the general nature of delegation. I get that, but if you want me to have a proper relationship with you, we have to meet face to face. I'm not doing the digital thing and I'm going to represent you later on. That's not going to work. That doesn't work for me. And that's one of the reasons that, quite frankly, I've been successful in my law practice, is that people see me and they like me. Hard to do that when you're doing it digitally. Not easy to get the same gut feeling that you get when you meet somebody in person. There's power in meeting people face to face.
No ifs, ands, or buts. Let's talk a little bit about some of those relationships that help you understand that yourself. I
Mhm.
mean, you talked about the person who was working at that what was it, the elementary
Community
school,
center.
the
Community.
community center. But give me some ideas of some of the other relationships that put you on track of recognizing that relationships were important.
Well, my brother was key in my life, and he passed away uh, a few years ago. Uh,
It's your older
we
brother,
did. It was
the older,
the middle
oh,
one,
the
not
middle
the
one.
oldest.
Okay, got it, got it, got
I
it, got
was
it,
I was the youngest one, and
got it.
so my brother Carrie was in the beginning my tormentor. We were 6 years apart, and he was my teaser in chief. And it wasn't until we got into our teens that we started to get closer through a series of events that occurred. And he was my everything in my life. He was my spiritual guide. He was my financial advisor. He was the guy that knew me really well, the guy that I could sit in a car with and just BS about everything in the world, including our own family, right? As small as it was. So he was a very, very important person in my life. Look, I have my current wife who is, you know, there are some relationships that are beyond genuine and authentic. There are some relationships that are truly deep and soulful. And that's my wife now. And so she's been a tremendous person in my life. In college, I met a number of people who were very helpful to me, who were kind, and some people that I still speak to now. So there have been people all along that have made the journey a lot easier. So, and that's what I kind of want to tell people, that you don't have to be alone in this journey.
Some of the tips that you have for nurturing personal relationships.
Well, one of the things that I always, again, we talk about acknowledging the need, finding your people. What does that mean? Finding your people. Well, for me, it meant don't have to join the groups that your uncle told you to join to meet people. Don't have, if that's not what you want, you don't have to join the neighborhood civic association if that's not what you really want to do, just because your teacher told you to do that. Join groups, find people that you have a common interest with. Because if you join a philanthropic organization because you think that's the cool organization to join right now, people are going to see right through you, and they're going to know you're not there truly for them.
And especially right now when people are joining organizations only online and never have that physical
Face
contact, it's like
right.
almost I don't understand what the value of even the relationship to begin with was.
That's correct. So when I joined the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation and I got active in there, people knew that I was involved because I had a real interest in it, because it was a big part of my life. Now, if I don't think I would join another group. It doesn't matter if it's a worthwhile group. So I always tell people, find groups that you're interested in, really important. And of course, there's listening. How do you listen versus hear somebody? And that, I learned through a trying time in my first marriage, you have to be able to listen to your partner, whether it's your wife or your husband or your business partner. You have to be able to listen to what people are saying. If the only part of the conversation you're waiting for is the time to talk, then you're looking for danger. That's not going to create genuine and authentic relationships.
Yeah, people need to understand that there are some ways to go about that because, active listening sometimes requires mimicking. I mean, for yourself. Person says something, we think we understand, but maybe we don't. And so if you take the time to repeat what that person said to you, did I get that right? You meant that,
That's correct.
the
That's correct.
person says, well, no, that's not exactly what I meant. I meant,
That's
then go ahead and
correct.
say it again. So did you actually mean, yes, that's what I meant. Gotcha. Okay. Then you can go home and think about
That's
that
correct.
process. Correct. Okay. For
Yeah,
sure.
and by the way, listening doesn't always involve the ears. You have to, you have to look at somebody eye to eye. You have to be able to look at nonverbal gestures that somebody might make, because all of these things tell you a little bit more about what the person is saying, and that's the key to listening. Very important.
You talk about in a book something about, the five most important behaviors for quality relationships. What are they?
Yeah, so we have to acknowledge the need for each other. You have to find your people, right? You have to listen more than you talk. You have to have that face to face contact. Key, key. If you could know all the other behaviors, but if you're not going to ultimately meet face to face, then there's going to be a problem. There's going to be an issue. And of course, for me, probably one of the most important ways of building relationships that are genuine and authentic is sharing your story. Now, some of us may not know what our story is. Some of us may know what it is, but we don't want to share it. But
Well,
that's
we
one,
don't want to face it, right?
or we don't want to face it, right? But that may be one of the most important things you could do anywhere. And that is to share your story. Once you start sharing your story, you will create the kind of trust and relationship dynamic that so many people long for.
And that's really what you do in this book. Again, who's in the waiting room, create the life you want through the power of authentic relationships. It's really an explanation of yourself. You share, and then you also share what you learn. So what you learn now in retrospect. So you can look back at things and say, well, this is really what it was doing for my life. And it's a good way for people to kind of like model for their own lives.
Yes, yeah, I hope so. Fred Rogers said, "Never underestimate your mere existence here on Earth and the power it could have on other people." And Albert Einstein, it said at some point, you have to stop reading books and write your own. And that's and I truly believe that. I felt that for a good part of my life, and I'm just at this point I'm overwhelmed by the number of people that that are saying so many kind things to me about the book. I really didn't expect that.
I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that so many people have been so disconnected
Yeah,
from reality that 1 second's worth, 2 seconds worth of reality makes them recognize that something I should be doing myself. I mean, again, I go to this highly technical age that we live in, and the type of relationships that you were talking about are relationships that I'd say the majority of people out there, especially younger generations, don't even understand that they're capable of having those kind of relationships.
correct. That's correct. And listen, my kids are no different. I don't have any special kids. My daughter tells me that she spoke to a friend. I said, "What did she say?" And then I realized you didn't speak to her. You texted her.
Right.
What's that about? Don't you didn't speak to her. It's very, very difficult. And when I talk to people that want to work with me for different things, I say to them, listen, if your whole goal in building a business is you want to just take $10,000 a month and give it a Google, then don't ask me for advice, because my advice is going to be completely opposite of that. That's not what I'm about. Maybe it's a small part of the plan, but it's not far from the whole plan. So if you want to do that, that's fine. Don't have to work with me. I don't believe in that.
Gotcha. Well, I also, again, if people wanted to get the book, where do they go?
They can go to Amazon, and it's Who's in the Waiting Room.
Who's in the waiting room? Okay. And if they wanted to reach out to you, do you have a
Yeah,
old
yeah.
official phone?
My personal email is neilg@truthinsuccess.com.
Okay. All right. So people can reach out and just interact with you and to get some more advice. What else did you want to share?
Well, I think it's important, that that people remember, your business life and your personal life, it's one life. People like to separate it and think that somehow they can divide their lives. I have one calendar for business, one calendar for personal. It's 24 hours, it's one life. And so when I talk about building relationships, obviously I'm talking about it both on a personal level and on a business level. People that want to, especially young people that want to try and create, they want to be entrepreneurs. That's a big thing now. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Okay, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but in my opinion, success comes when you have um, authentic relationships, even in your business, because let's be honest, we all want to work with people that we like. I mean, I'll never forget. After I got married, I used to go back to my childhood dentist, who was an hour and a half away. I would drive. Why? Did I think he was something special? Did he have some special degree? I had no idea why I was going back. And then when I thought about it over the years, and I realized why? Because I liked him. He was nice to me, and he was competent, of course. And that's the key. You want to create some level of humanity if you're going to conduct, if you're going to become an entrepreneur. It shouldn't just be about your phone, your computer, your website. It's got to be more than that.
I talk a little bit about the losses in your life and how you were able to deal with them. You were able to deal with the loss of your father and the loss of your mother. Loss of your father emotionally
Right.
and from a being there standpoint, but also the physical loss of him, right? And the physical loss of
Right.
your mother. How did
Right.
those things impact you?
Oh man, my father's loss. I always used to say when I was younger. I remember I always used to say, "It didn't affect me. I'm okay. It didn't affect me. I'm fine." But the truth of the matter is, when you lose your father, um, it affects you in a way that you can't
Profound.
imagine.
Right.
And as far as mom goes, mom was an MS warrior like you can't imagine at a time when there wasn't many helping hands. Um, so but I didn't have a mother the way many people had, and but fortunately, she was fortunate enough to go from signing dropout high school papers to sitting at Lincoln Center and watching me graduate from law school. And so I'm happy that I was able to make that happen for her. And it was only because of her strength and 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 some of the things that she taught me, not even realizing that she taught me those things, that made me the person that I am today.
Absolutely. So if there's one other thing, just one other really key point that you'd like to share with our viewers to let them know that, even if you have not sought out other relationships to this point in time, this is why you should do so now.
Yeah, as we're exiting a pandemic, we all know how important it is to have relationships, very key. And where digital serves a purpose in this world, there's no question about it. And it serves a purpose for people that are isolated and people that are not well. For most of us, or for many of us, it's not the way to create real, authentic relationships. And in my opinion, having real, authentic relationships is the only way that you're going to get to the level of success that you want, whether it's personally or it's in your business life. One life, but in either direction, that's how you get to be successful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Neil, I got to say thank you so much. I want to shout out to all of our listeners and viewers that, the book is again at Amazon and it is right here. I'll hold it still so you can see it. Who's in the waiting room? Create the life you want through the power of authentic relationships. Available on Amazon right now. So you can go up to Amazon, look at it, look for it, who's in the waiting room, and get yourself a copy. I think it's a really nice read. And the exercise that you put at the end of each chapter, I think will help people figure out how to develop those relationships that you're talking about. So I want to thank you so much, sir, for being a part of Free Thinking with Montel today. And of course, if you ever want to drop back by again, we'd love to talk to you. Okay.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely, sir. You have a great day, and you keep tuning in to Free Thinking with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Free Thinking with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear feedback, so please send us your comments.